r/AskReddit, who is a bad guy in history who actually wasn't a bad guy? That woman who spilled McDonald's coffee on her lap. A dingo really ate her baby. In Braveheart, William Wallace gets betrayed by Robert the Bruce, which never happened. He was loyal to the end. Richard Jewell, security guard at the Atlanta Olympic who was blamed for the bombing. Machiavelli, one of the most honest dudes in history, and his name is instead synonymous with villainy. Niccolò Machiavelli. Machiavelli didn't invent the idea of lying or ruthlessness. He made an observation about what worked and tried to get a new gig. Now his name is synonymous with heartless manipulator. Captain Hazelwood of the Exxon Valdez. He is often pictured on the helm of the Exxon swaying drunkenly, going full throttle into the reef, talking like a pirate. What actually happened? Valdez's critical navigation equipment was out of commission, faxes sent to Exxon and Exxon told them to sail instead. Coast Guard budget cuts removed vessel tracking in the area. Green and tired crew was on duty, request was made to relieve crew. It was denied. XO, who was on con at the time, was inexperienced on the passage and neither requested pilotage. While Hazelwood did drink that day, he was not in command of the con at the time and was in his quarters resting. Hazelwood made a comment that he needed a drink because of how upset he was over the situation. Exxon's PR paid off the media to blame Hazelwood. However, Hazelwood was charged with only one charge, which was for pollution. He proved he was not a drunkard and retained his captain's license, even getting offers to sail again, which he turned down. The real villains are mass media, false news, and comedians, but Exxon's PR's spending power to keep the blame off them. Hazelwood passed away last year after the end of the spill. Random fact: the Valdez sailed until 2008 under different name Oriental Nicety. Anyone that is familiar with the movie 300 is aware of how it sanitizes the Spartans and how it demonizes the First Persian Empire. The reality is that the First Persian Empire, or the Achaemenid Empire, was pretty forward-thinking for the era. This is the empire that freed the Jews from the Babylonians and gave the world the Cyrus Cylinder, which some regard as the first Bill of Rights. As for Sparta, it was a militaristic society based on social Darwinism, centuries before the birth of Charles Darwin, and it had a greater percentage of slaves than Persia ever did. Edit: I am not suggesting that the First Persian Empire was perfect, I am just pointing out the historically inaccurate and racist portrayal of Persia in the movie 300. In the film Titanic, the character Murdoch killed someone, took bribes, and generally came across as a right shit. He was a real-life person who was actually a hero and saved many lives. His living relatives were so disgusted that the VP of Fox traveled to Dalbeattie to personally apologize and presented a £5,000 donation to Dalbeattie High School to boost the school's William Murdoch Memorial Prize. Richard Jewell, initially lauded as a hero and a brave man who ran towards the bomb to help. Then the FBI and media turned on him and accused him of doing the bombing himself, because he was actually just as fucking outlandishly brave and ran toward the bomb to help people. They took his truck for evidence, he had to go into hiding, made a villain by incompetent people. For years, finally exonerated and dies shortly afterward. That woman who was accused of kidnapping children because her kids didn't have her DNA, but in fact her uterus had different DNA than the rest of her body. The McDonald's coffee lady, the woman who sued McDonald's after she spilled coffee on her lap, received third-degree burns in her pelvic area. She was hospitalized for 8 days and required a couple years of rehabilitation. The media jumped on the story, making it a poster case for frivolous lawsuits. Edit: corrected typos. Hades. He barely cheated on his wife and was loyal. He only kidnapped Persephone because Zeus told him to. He's a good father. He doesn't cause death, only what happens after. Also, he named his dog Spot, adorable. People always act like he's evil and malicious. But in all reality he's a sweet guy. Nander the Relentless. And the award for the most dangerous question of the day goes to Tom the Cat. Jerry is a menace. William Thomas Green Morton died broke defending his discovery of anesthesia. He was a dentist and didn't get much respect from the doctors at the time. One of the most important medical discoveries. Monica Lewinsky. Murdoch, on the Titanic. Dude went down saving lives? Cameron needlessly made him corrupt. Then apologized by paying $5,000 to the guy's village or something. Sorry, I don't know why I wrote Captain. The guy that Winseld's fiancée tried to bribe to make room for him on the boat. Yeah, he was nothing like that. One to pocket money, that is. He stayed till the end. Swell fellow. Cameron did apologize and pay. If he'd done nothing wrong, why would he? Herbert Hoover. He was a lifelong humanitarian and had a reputation as an excellent administrator, which led him to win the presidency of the U.S. in 1928. But less than 8 months after he took office, the world was rocked by one of the worst economic depressions in history. It was also during Hoover's presidency that mass media like radio and newsreels started spreading wildly, and Hoover was a breathtakingly awful speaker with poor public relations skills. So Hoover got trounced in the next election by FDR's abundant optimism and wide-toothy grin, and was forever tarred in history as being the uncaring standoffish bureaucrat who ignored all the hardships of the Great Depression from his White House perch. The bad guy Razor Ramon. Milli Vanilli, one committed suicide for being hired in a music industry lip-syncing travesty that's basically now commonplace. The real villain is the record industry. Edit. Not enough of y'all commenting realize that Frank Farian is to blame for hiring them in the first place. Rob and Fab could have been anyone. Farian orchestrated, Rob and Fab scapegoated. Edit 2. I was wrong to say suicide, I apologize for that. My memory isn't what it used to be. Rob's death may not have been directly from the scandal, but I don't think it's a stretch to say the two events are intertwined. John Brown, fighting to end slavery will always be based. Sinead O'Connor. A lot of Tudor women come to mind: Catherine Howard, Mary Tudor, and Anne Boleyn. Catherine was sexually abused her entire life only for Thomas Culpeper to use it to blackmail and assault her. Almost every man in her life abused or used her, and she died a teenage girl. After her death, people made up bullshit about her wanting to be married to a rapist and blackmailer. She was a child. Mary Tudor was horrifically abused by her own father, torn from her mother and prevented from seeing her, even as she was dying, and went on to be demonized way more heavily than her father, who was a tyrant. Mary tried her best with what she had. After her father divorced her mother, she lived with the constant threat of assassination or execution. Her own father was willing to kill her. Anne Boleyn was not a seductress who tried to steal the king. She did not want the king and initially flirted with him to get back at a guy who courted and ditched her. She only agreed to marry Henry because she had to. Even before he met Anne, he was looking for a way to end his marriage to Catalina, Catherine de Aragon. Why? Because the only reason they were married was to preserve an alliance with Spain, and that fell through, and she didn't have a son. None of which was Catalina's fault. Nor was Anne's. Anne Boleyn never wore yellow during the time of mourning for Catalina. And didn't abuse Mary. Henry did. Dr. Kevorkian. Richard III. Demonized by the Tudors, in part due to his curved spine, now confirmed, and their political agendas. He might have been a good king or a bad king/person, but it is difficult to determine, as the records that followed his death are so incredibly biased. Germany has left the chat. Pharaoh Cleopatra, she was actually a pretty good ruler, with her focusing more on her nation than just abusing her position for her own benefit. There's even some records saying that she wasn't even all that beautiful. She was, however, very intelligent, with stuff like how she learned around 10 different languages. Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. I did close to 25 YRS. In prison for something I never did. Friends and family all gone. I survived it all. Life can suck, but one can endure, it seems, without losing your mind if you're lucky. If you wish to call that lucky. More a set of bad guys, but the Persians, especially from the 300 era. Classical Greeks and Romans seem to get a free pass for cultural influence. Don't know if the Persians were necessarily great, I don't know enough about them, but certainly not the bad guys. Heinz Tugendschmerz. A lot of the women of history who have been treated as sluts/liars/manipulative/murderers, etc. Example being Elizabeth Bathory, a woman with money and power, and her uncle wanted it, so she gets locked in a room and goes down in history for bathing in the blood of virgins. Not saying she was a good person necessarily, just that the idea that she murdered hundreds of local young women so she could bathe in their blood is bollocks. And there are many more women who gets treated the same. Really, many of those who lost and whose story gets written by those that won. Captain Bligh. His mistake was being too soft rather than too harsh. He let his crew slack off while they were waiting to make sure the breadfruit trees would survive transplantation, and they mutinied when he put them back to work. Marie Antoinette never said let them eat cake when she heard that her people couldn't afford bread. She was executed out of frustration for how bad things became during the French Revolution, and was wrongly misattributed for the ideology of someone in power being out of touch with being poor. Amanda Knox. She was accused of killing her college study abroad roommate after extremely sloppy investigation, wild claims, cruel tabloid journals calling her all kinds of slut-shaming names, and asserting that she killed the roommate because she, roommate, wouldn't agree to a threesome, the true killer's DNA being all over the damn place, etc. etc. She was cleared of all charges later on, but she and her equally innocent beau spent years in prison in Italy for it. King George III, king opposite the American Revolution. One of the big causes of the revolution was that King George demanded the colonists respect treaties with Native Americans and refrain from moving west into Native American territory. They hated that and revolted to nullify those treaties. Bad guy is a matter of perspective. If you are a Native American, then the revolutionaries were absolutely the bad guys. The truth is that American colonists were taxed more after the revolution than prior, and George made a huge amount of concessions to them to keep them happy, including reducing their taxes until they were the lowest taxes of all British colonies. Most of the bad stuff that history covers, like the Stamp Act and the tea taxes, were after attempts to pacify the colonists and were used to make a show of force when the peaceful tactics failed and the two sides started to spite each other. Most Americans have no clue what name is opposite George Washington and the like other prominent founding fathers in the Revolutionary War. They hardly learn about anything but the propaganda that is now over 200 years old. Ty Cobb. The stories about him being racist were lies spread in a rag, and told by a guy who made up a bunch of lies to sell a book, and Cobb tried to sue him before he died. He never stabbed a black waiter. The 3 black people he got into a fight with at a bar were actually white. He was never a member of the KKK, and actually supported integration in baseball and was participated in the opening of a Negro League ballpark. He was a big fan of Willie Mays. None of the bullshit about him was backed up by any evidence, yet the film Cobb was made around the lies, and he was demonized by the public for decades after his death. Only recently have people found out the truth. Julius Caesar. His murderers expected the people to rejoice upon being freed from the tyrant. Instead, the people wept and rioted. They loved Caesar because, unlike most of the senators, he truly cared for the people and sometimes would spend all night writing up laws. He is the reason the grain bill worked to feed to neediest. He grew up with the common man, and it's often forgotten how much he did for them. There is a reason the people loved him more than the Senate. Was he perfect? No. Did he try and gain power? Yes. But isn't dictatorship worse than an oligarchy? It's clear that Rome was in much better hands with Caesar than the Senate. Caligula. A lot of the stories of him being mad were just posthumous propaganda by his political opponents. Considering the horrific abuse by Tiberius he suffered as a child, Caligula was remarkable well balanced. Thanks for watching. Leave a like if you have enjoyed this video and subscribe to never miss an upload.